You know, between the Ghost concert being postponed and now the release of this album, I'm pretty sure the universe just wanted my 19th birthday to be as thoroughly underwhelming as possible. Not exactly a milestone birthday, so I'm not really upset, but still. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spin It Reviews, and today I'm going to be talking about the new album from the Neighbourhood called Wiped Out! This is kind of a tricky band for me to talk about because when they first came out, I was really loving what they were doing with singles going over alternative radio, like Sweater Weather, obviously their big breakout hit. Female Robbery, my personal favorite song from them. They just kind of had this unique, kind of dark, dreary sound to them, but at the same time they could make some pretty catchy songs. I thought it was a nice balance, and even though reaction to their first album, I Love You, was a little bit mixed, I was kind of in the middle on it. I thought the deep cuts were kind of underwhelming for the most part, but, you know, I could see what the Neighbourhood were doing. I could respect that they had their own sound. Unfortunately, the next year, they dropped Black and White, a mixtape that, in retrospect, I gave way too much credit for. Sure, in theory, it was a really cool idea. A band dropping a mixtape on Dat Piff, making a bunch of collabs with rappers. It seemed like an interesting idea, if not maybe a little bandwagony. This thing was just cringeworthy from start to finish, outside maybe a couple tracks. Terrible guest verses, and frontman Jesse Rutherford was just doing this terrible, like, Drake impression across basically the whole album. The whininess that was kind of prevalent on some of I Love You was just non-stop on this mixtape, and it just got really grating after a while. I was willing to forgive in general just for being a little one-off experiment that just didn't really pan out for them, you know? A lot of artists do that. So I was still pretty interested in what they would do on their sophomore commercial record, Wiped Out. Unfortunately, the little issues I had with I Love You were just amped up to another level on Wiped Out. This album was just a chore to get through. You remember what I said in my Beach House review about how they use reverb to complement their sound and add to it instead of just globbing it on in the hopes of masking piss-poor songwriting? Well, the Neighbourhood is one of a group of bands that are on the opposite side of that. I feel like the producer of this album essentially treats the reverb knob like the atmosphere button. Like, if you crank it up more and more, it'll be more moody, more compelling, more edgy, more dark, when really it just washes everything out and keeps it from being memorable, even with some of the more well-written songs like The Beach and Pray and Crybaby, which were really my three highlights on that. Actually, not really so much for Crybaby, because I think the reason why that's maybe my favorite song on this album is that it's the one moment here where they actually use the reverb sparingly. Like, it's there, don't get me wrong, it's there, but it kind of goes along with the sound, and there's more of a tight rhythm to it. It's definitely catchy melodically. I'm not saying that they have to make these tight, like, radio-ready pop songs all the time, but they are basically writing pop songs, and it just does not make sense to coat everything in these globs of effects for no real reason other than trying to separate yourself from a typical pop song when you're just writing a lot of typical pop stuff anyway. A lot of the time it feels like the effects are center stage instead of the band themselves. And speaking of the band presence, outside of the song like Pray, or maybe even a little bit of Crybaby and a little guitar line here and there that's nice, but at parts it just feels like Jesse was messing around with the production board and singing on it while his bandmates were just kind of standing awkwardly in the corner waiting for their turn to put in one little hit here and there. The way everything blurs together on this album just makes it so boring unless you're listening to every song like super closely. Like, you're gonna miss a lot of this album, and it's not even in a good way where there's a lot of subtleties, but that they cover everything up and it makes everything less memorable. Part of the reason why my only 3 highlights on this album are within the first 5 tracks. Maybe they are the most well written. As the album goes on, it just gets more taxing on my patience. Like, R.I.P. My Youth is the closer, and I feel like, and I don't even really like that song, and wasn't really a good choice for the lead single in my opinion, but I have a feeling I'd like it more if it was track 6 instead of track 12, because by the end of the album, I am just over it. I'll get a little bit more into pretentiousness once I go into lyrics, but musically there are definitely signs of that too. Starting right off the bat with the opening track, which isn't even a song, it's 30 seconds called A Moment of Silence, as if these guys think they are so important with these deep, epic things they are addressing on this album. And the deepest thing really is just the pool of reverb they coat over every one of these songs. Perfect examples on tracks like the title track, Wiped Out, where it starts out okay, but then 4.5 of its 6 minutes did not need to be there. It just goes into this boring loop of poorly thought out guitar parts and inanely repetitive lyrics delivered in a bad Drake impression, going back to that black and white tape. And the instrumentation kills what would have otherwise been a pretty good highlight, Baby Came Home Too, a continuation of that song from their debut EP, which lyrically is one of the better moments on here, kind of continues that story. It is maybe the most boring, long-winded musical moment here, and no matter how okay it is lyrically compared with the rest of this, it just kills it entirely. And speaking of lyrics, that is probably the biggest sin of this album, because if this was instrumental, this whole album was instrumental, no vocals, or at least no intelligible lyrics, you could put it on as moody filler background music and it would be pretty harmless. There's nothing about this album that's inherently unlistenable. But when you're listening to this while reading along with the crap this guy wrote, it just makes it so much more of a chore to get through. It's always funny when the best song on your album is the one that completely contradicts the message of the rest of it. That being the song Cry Baby, which is inherently exactly about not being whiny about the tiniest things. I kind of wonder why Jesse couldn't have just taken his own advice over the course of that, because that's exactly what he does on the other 10 songs. It really undercuts the song itself in a way. It kind of reminds me of that song from the Robin Thicke album, Paula, where he basically says, oh, you know what, this girl just completely hates my guts, I should get out of here, when the entire album was about him trying to get her back in this really pathetic way. I digress, but this is along the same lines, and if you saw my review of that, you know that's not exactly the most positive comparison. In a way, this has kind of the same problem that the music does, though in a different way. Forced darkness. Every little moment on here is just pushed to this melodramatic degree that I just do not care about. Whether he's just being super vague, like on a couple tracks here, especially the title track when he delivers such brilliant poetry as, I think I'm going crazy, I can't make up my mind, I can feel the way that I'm feeling, the feeling in my head. He also says, I'm thinking about death pretty explicitly in that, which he apparently thinks automatically makes what he's saying more compelling and meaningful, as opposed to going into, I don't know, why are you thinking about death? What or what might be causing you to think about death? Go more in depth into your thoughts about death. Don't just say, I'm thinking about death, and expect people to connect to it. Elaborate if you want that to happen. Though in some weird way, I kind of prefer when Jesse is vague over when he is specific about his message and intent in a song. The crown jewel of the unlikability being Daddy Issues, an absolutely appalling song that's not even trying to hide the fact that it's about using familial trauma as a pickup line. It treats crying about it, which this girl is doing, like some kind of sexy move. And don't think I'm getting like a dirty mind, just thinking that this is all sex related. He doesn't even try to hide that in the first couple lines of this, and of course he tries to play it all off toward the end of saying, oh, but my dad left me too, so it's okay. By the end, it's just too little too late. Though in a way this is kind of an outlier in terms of the badness, because a lot of it is just about how sour he comes off. Like in the song Ferrari, which is a perfect example of a kiss-off song that doesn't work because the narrator comes off just as unlikable in the process. Sure, the way he describes this girl, she's a little bit hypocritical, a little bit egocentric, but in the process in this song, he comes off materialistic when talking about the title car, catty, and just like an unpleasant person to be around in general. But getting back on track with another seriously questionable moment, we get the song Single, which is essentially about trying to get a girl back through her dad. Now, at first I figured the chorus, can you let your baby be my girl, was like trying to ask the dad for blessing to marry her daughter or something like that. But the girl shows absolutely no signs of giving any amount of craps about this guy. There's no consideration that the girl can make her own decisions, but rather we're just like catapulted back into medieval times, and Jesse thinks that he can just buy back this girl with 3 copper pieces and a goat or something. And the last thing I want to point out is I was pretty indifferent on the song R.I.P. to my youth, but there is one line on this that seriously rubbed me the wrong way. That being, if I can't breathe, don't call a cop. Basically, with that reference, comparing his quarter-life crisis to police brutality. A little melodramatic, don't you think? This just takes it way too far. I mean, you don't see Tower Josephine stressed out saying, oh, I wish I can go back to the good old days of not having to worry about stuff. Now I feel like one of Jared Fogel's fuckboys. I just did not like this album at all. I didn't have super high expectations just going off of Black and White, but I was still expecting at least some kind of redeeming factor or improvement outside maybe 2.5 songs. But as is, this is a boring, insufferable listen that I can't give any higher than like a 3 out of 10. Just, I would not recommend this in the slightest. It's pretentious, it's boring, it's just reeking with douchebaggery at every turn, just trying to force itself to be darker than it actually is. Kind of going back to that freaking Black and White thing that these guys have going, which I know isn't related to the music, but it's still a pretty annoying image thing. In fact, I'm not wearing this Angels and Airwaves shirt because it's black and white. I'm wearing it because it's on that same level of pretentiousness. Honestly, I think I'm just done with the Neighborhood at this point. Unless I hear, like, some really good stuff about the next thing they put out, I think I'm just kind of gonna let this go, since it looks like all their buzz is pretty much evaporated anyway. So, if you guys have heard this album, what do you think about it? Do you agree with what I had to say? Do you disagree? Have any feedback about the channel in general? Let me know in the comments down below, and please be sure to be civil if you disagree. I'm not gonna say that you're stupid for liking this album or anything like that. It would make me as much of a douchebag as I consider the lyrics on this album to be. Like my Facebook and Twitter pages linked in the description, and hopefully I'll see you in the next episode of Spinner Reviews.